All right, so get ready because today we are diving into some seriously unsettling material. We've got this mix of fictional excerpts and a summarized document. And it's interesting because they seem to weave together this story of suspense and psychology, maybe even a touch of the paranormal. I don't know about you, but
Oh, yeah.
it's a little creepy. And what's really interesting is that the excerpts seem to be from like a thriller novel, and then the summarized document seems to be covering the same story, but kind of from a different perspective.
Interesting.
So we've got this couple, Eric and Claire, and Eric is dealing with a ton of stress. So he heads off to a remote cabin for some peace and quiet, for trying to get away from it all. But things start to get really strange out there.
Yeah. What really strikes me is how the story sets up this contrast between Eric and Claire, right? You've got Eric, who's completely overwhelmed by work, battling these debilitating migraines,
Yeah.
desperately seeking solace in isolation. It's almost like he's reached a breaking point, would you say?
Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic. And it kind of, it makes me wonder about those times when we try to push through stress,
Yeah.
like
that-
telling ourselves we can handle it all. And, when I read this, it really made me think about the importance of recognizing those limits before things start to unravel.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And what's fascinating is that the story doesn't present Claire as like completely heartless or uncaring. We
Yeah.
see her doing research on bipolar disorder.
Yeah.
It seems like she's trying to make sense of Eric's increasingly odd behavior. It's almost as if she's searching for a rational explanation for something that might be beyond the realm of logic.
Yeah, that's true. But speaking of things beyond logic,
Yeah.
there's this detail about Eric's reading material. He brings along Edgar Allan Poe's Murders in the Rue Morgue. And Claire even mentions that it's supposed to help him relax. I don't know about you, but reading Poe doesn't exactly scream relaxation to me.
Right. That's interesting. That choice of reading material is definitely significant. I mean, you have this man on the verge of a breakdown, seeking solace in the wilderness. And he chooses to immerse himself in a tale of brutal, seemingly senseless murder. It's almost like the story is subtly foreshadowing the darkness that's about to unfold.
Right. It makes you wonder if
I
there's
mean-
a deeper connection between the fictional world of Poe's stories and the very real psychological turmoil that Eric's going through.
Absolutely.
Ah.
And what's even more unsettling is that as Eric spends more time alone in the cabin, these strange things start happening. He hears unsettling noises, feels a presence, and ultimately encounters a creature that seems straight out of a nightmare.
So, okay, we've got a stressed out guy in a creepy cabin reading Poe, and now he's having potential hallucinations. This is where it starts to feel like we've crossed over into the territory of psychological thriller, wouldn't you say?
Definitely. And the story does a brilliant job of blurring the lines between reality and perception. I mean, think about it. Prolonged isolation, especially when combined with extreme stress and anxiety, can have a profound impact on the mind. It's possible that Eric's internal turmoil is manifesting in these external unsettling experiences.
Right.
But then there's also this lingering question, is it all in his head? Or is there something truly sinister at play in that cabin?
And that's the question that keeps us hooked, right? I mean, we're constantly trying to decipher what's real and what's a product of Eric's potentially fractured psyche.
Exactly. And, while Eric is isolated in the woods, we see Claire back in the city wrestling with her own anxieties about him. She's trying to balance her demanding career with her growing concern for Eric's well-being. Kind of highlights this tension between personal responsibility and the demands of our modern lives.
Yeah. And just as Claire decides to drive to the cabin to check on Eric, she disappears. Her phone goes straight to voicemail. And we're left wondering, was this a simple accident? Foul play? Or is there a connection to the strange events at the cabin? It feels like the story is deliberately throwing us off balance, challenging our assumptions, and making us question everything we thought we knew.
It's a masterfully crafted moment of suspense, wouldn't you
Yeah.
say? And here's where the story takes a truly shocking turn.
Hold on to your seats, folks, because this is where it gets really intense.
We discover that the source of the terror, the one behind the strange happenings at the cabin, isn't some external force, but Eric himself.
I have to admit my jaw dropped when I first read this. It completely flips the narrative on its head, We've been led to believe that Eric is a victim, but now we're forced to confront the possibility that he's the one orchestrating these terrifying events. It's a classic unreliable narrator scenario. But the way it's executed in this story is truly chilling.
It's a brilliant twist, and it makes you kind of, reconsider everything that came before. Like suddenly all those seemingly insignificant details take on a whole new meaning. Remember that strange droning sound Eric hears when he first arrives at the cabin?
Yeah.
He can't figure out what it is, but it seems to really unsettle him.
Yeah, I remember that detail. It felt almost ominous. but I couldn't quite put my finger on why.
Well, now knowing that Eric is the one causing the terror, that droning sound could be interpreted as like a foreshadowing of his own predatory instincts awakening. You know, it's like the story is subtly hinting at the darkness that's lurking beneath the surface.
Wow, I hadn't even thought of that.
Yeah,
It's amazing how the story plays with our perceptions, leading us down one path, while planting these subtle clues that take on a whole new meaning in hindsight.
exactly.
Yeah.
And it's not just the sound, there's also the imagery of the woods themselves. They're described as both beautiful and threatening, which kind of mirrors the duality of Eric's character. On the surface, he's seeking peace and tranquility, but underneath, there's this growing darkness that's slowly consuming him.
It's almost like the woods become a symbolic representation of Eric's inner landscape. And speaking of symbolism, we can't forget about the book within a book element with Edgar Allan Poe. We talked about the foreshadowing aspect earlier, but now I'm starting to think there's even more to it.
Oh, absolutely. Remember, Eric isn't just reading any Poe stories. He's specifically drawn to Murders in the Rue Morgue, which, as you know, involves a brutal and seemingly senseless crime, much like Claire's eventual fate. And then there's The Black Cat, a chilling tale of a man descending into madness who ends up killing his wife. It's almost like a twisted reflection of Eric's own trajectory.
It's like he's channeling the spirit of Poe himself. And it makes you wonder if Eric is somehow influenced by these stories. Did they plant a seed of darkness in his mind that ultimately led to his horrific actions?
It's a fascinating question.
Yeah.
It speaks to the power of literature to both reflect and shape our understanding of ourselves and the world, but it also raises questions about the nature of influence and whether we can truly separate fiction from reality.
Right. And while we're grappling with these questions about Eric's motivations, the story doesn't let us forget about the impact of his actions on those around him. Claire's mother is completely distraught, and even Eric's therapist seems to sense that something is deeply wrong. It highlights the ripple effect of trauma and violence, how one person's actions can have devastating consequences for everyone in their orbit.
Exactly. And the fact that the cabin is ultimately sold to an unsuspecting buyer adds another layer of unease. It suggests that the cycle of violence and secrecy might continue with the new owner, blissfully unaware of the horrors that transpired there. It's like a ghost story where the haunting never truly ends.
So if we're looking at this through a psychological lens, could Eric's transformation be seen as a manifestation of repressed anger? Maybe even some kind of personality disorder?
It's certainly possible. You know, the story provides hints about Eric's past struggles with stress, anxiety, and difficulty coping with pressure. It's conceivable that these issues were never fully addressed and ultimately contributed to his breakdown. But then there are those moments in the story where Eric seems almost possessed by an external force. He describes feeling choked, experiencing intense headaches, and even being physically thrown to the ground.
Yeah. Those details definitely add a supernatural element to the story, and it's this blending of the psychological and the potentially paranormal that makes the story so unsettling. We're constantly trying to figure out if Eric's actions are purely the result of his own internal demons, or if there's something darker at play. It's like the story is daring us to question the nature of reality itself.
It's a brilliant technique, wouldn't you say? It
Mhm.
taps into those primal fears about the unknown and the potential for darkness to exist just beyond the veil of our everyday perception. But what I find particularly interesting is how the story also explores the theme of deception.
Oh, absolutely. Deception is woven throughout the narrative on multiple levels. We have Eric deceiving himself about his own sanity, Claire trying to rationalize his behavior, and ultimately the story itself deceiving us as readers by leading us down one path before pulling the rug out from under us.
It's like a masterclass in manipulation.
Yeah.
And it makes you wonder how much of what we believe to be true is actually just a carefully constructed facade.
It's a thought-provoking question for sure. It reminds me of all the true crime documentaries I've watched where seemingly ordinary people turn out to be capable of horrific acts. It's a chilling reminder that we never truly know what's going on inside someone else's mind.
And that uncertainty is precisely what makes this story so effective. It taps into our deepest fears about the hidden potential for darkness within ourselves and those around us.
Okay, let's talk about Claire for a minute. She seems so strong and independent at the beginning, but...
But there's also a vulnerability to her,
Okay.
especially in her relationship with Eric. She clearly loves him and wants to help him, but she's also blinded by her own desire for a stable, predictable life.
And that blindness ultimately leads to her downfall. She ignores the red flags, rationalizes his behavior, and ultimately pays the ultimate price for her naivete. It's heartbreaking to see how her own intelligence and determination become her undoing. She's so focused on finding a logical explanation for Eric's behavior that she misses the obvious signs of his descent into madness.
It's a common theme in psychological thrillers. The characters often overthink and overanalyze, leading them further away from the truth rather than towards it. And in Claire's case, it's her unwavering belief in Eric's goodness that ultimately makes her so vulnerable to his manipulation.
This raises an important question about the nature of trust. How much should we trust our own instincts, even when they contradict what we want to believe?
It's a tough one. But this story suggests that sometimes it's better to be safe than sorry, even if it means questioning the people we love the most. It's a delicate balance, but this story shows us just how high the stakes can be when we fail to heed the warning signs and confront the darkness within ourselves and those around us.
It's interesting you bring up deception because it's not just Claire who's being deceived, right? Eric is a master of self-deception as well. He's constantly downplaying his own disturbing thoughts and actions, convincing himself that it's just stress or, being overworked. He even tries to use logic and reason to explain away the increasingly unsettling things that are happening around him.
Yeah, it's almost like he's using his intelligence as a shield, you know, trying to protect himself from the terrifying reality of what he's becoming. He creates these elaborate rationalizations for his behavior, even when it becomes violent and erratic. It's a classic defense mechanism, a way to avoid confronting the truth about his own descent into madness.
It's like his mind is fracturing, and he's desperately clinging to any shred of logic he can find to hold it together, and that fragmentation is reflected in the way the story is told, right? The narrative jumps back and forth between different timelines and perspectives, mirroring the chaotic state of Eric's mind. It's almost like we're experiencing his breakdown firsthand, feeling the ground shift beneath our feet as his grip on reality loosens.
And I think that disorientation is intentional. The story wants us to feel the same unease and uncertainty that Eric is experiencing, to make us question everything we thought we knew about him and the events unfolding.
It definitely adds to the suspense and keeps us guessing until the very end. Speaking of the ending, one thing that really struck me was the ambiguity surrounding Claire's death. While the story heavily implies that Eric is responsible, it's never explicitly confirmed. We're left with this lingering sense of doubt, wondering if there might be another explanation, something even more sinister at play.
Right. That's a great observation. It's like the story is planting a seed of paranoia in our minds, making us question everything we see and hear. And that paranoia is further fueled by the final scene where the cabin is sold to an unsuspecting buyer. It suggests that the cycle of violence and deception might continue with the new owner becoming the next victim of the cabin's dark history.
It's like the past can never truly be buried. The secrets we try to hide always have a way of resurfacing, often with devastating consequences. This story leaves us with so many unsettling questions. How much do we really know about the places we inhabit and the people we share our lives with? Could there be hidden darkness lurking beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to emerge?
It's a chilling thought. This deep dive has taken us into the darkest corners of the human psyche. We've explored the themes of stress, isolation, madness, deception, and the enduring power of the unknown. It's a story that stays with you long after you finish it, prompting you to question your own perceptions and confront the uncomfortable truths that often lie hidden in plain sight.
And on that note, I want to thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of psychological suspense. We hope you enjoyed this deep dive and that it's given you something to think about, perhaps even a few chills along the way. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep into the mysteries that surround us. You never know what unsettling truths you might uncover.